That's an opportunity for the groups to provide, to do such a thing. But as much as possible, they should always be self-sufficient. Child nutrition, again, and this is a professional opinion, you really should operate your child nutrition program in most settings self-sufficient. You're not depending on the general fund. There are some exceptions to that rule sometimes, but a program that's run well should be self-sufficient where it's not supplemented by the general fund. And Ms. Squire, like I always brag about, and her team do a great job where it is self-sufficient. Daycare, that one should be self-sufficient unless the board recognizes that and is supportive in terms of going a direction where it may have to be supplemented by the general fund. So those are just some highlights and some of the different fund balances. Turn the slide, please. AFR fund balance. So on the reports tonight, since we're still unaudited AFR until the submission today, I only reported up through FY20 since it's not finalized. But I just wanted to provide a real quick reference. I went on the KDE website and I took all the AFR balances at the end of FY20, and I sorted them by percentage of fund balance versus total expenditures for that year, the year to date. And we were about middle of the road. The line item shows 80 for those that can read it, but it's really, since there's 3 header rows, we were around 77 in the entire state in terms of that percentage. So, in my personal opinion, you don't want to be at the bottom for that percentage because that's not a good thing in terms of your financial standing. But then again, does it behoove you to be at the top? Because then, could there be those opportunities to collaborate with the instructional teams and in your different units within your school district where you're not just tucking away money for that general fund percentage. Now, there may be a justified reason why you go that way, or vice versa, but we're at 22.75 at the end of fiscal year 20, just for reference. Okay, turning the slide.
I have a quick question.
Yes.
Is there any way you could get us that for fiscal year 20 and then also for fiscal year 21 since it's
Once it's
approved? Yeah, and it finalizes with the approval. Thank you.
Okay, so the AFR fund balance report just through the last 3 years. FY18, as you'll see, we were at a little bit over 7.9 million for the Fund 1 balance. 2019, we had a drop in 6.9. I know it dropped to 6.9 in that fiscal year. And then in fiscal year 20, it dropped to 6.8. Not a significant drop. And I think there was probably some decisions made in that fiscal year 19. I can't speak to not being here at that point. I know there, if I'm not mistaken, there was a transfer of 600,000. And if I'm not mistaken, Ms. Springate, I know you were on the board that year in FY19. Do you recall?
We did set aside 600,000 for the new high school project, and then we later went and put that back in and did a 350 restriction.
Okay. So you can see the head's gone up and down in terms of.
Was there was also a cash allotment paid to the BG1 in that fiscal year that was not related to the restriction. Do you remember how much that was?
I believe it was around $1 million, but I'm not super sure. Honestly, I would like to have the reports for honestly all of these years, so to kind of go back and see if it's like an anomaly or if it's a pattern, if it's something we should be concerned about.
Sure.
I think that may account for the 600, but I agree, we need to go back and look at what was the cash that was allotted on the BG1 when we initially did that.
I know in the last 2 years we booked 350. For
Right.
20 we did the 350, and then 21 the 350. And I noticed that the 619 didn't want to speak out of turn with not being here. So okay, let's go ahead and turn the slide. Bonds outstanding. So we've currently have 5 bonds that are outstanding. One bond will fall off at the end of this fiscal year. There are actually 2 payments. One payment will be made this fall, and then another payment will be made in the spring/summer, and that will end the 2012 B acquisition of land adjacent to the middle school. So that's a positive thing. That bond payment will fall off at the end of 2022.
And on that, that is not the total purchase price, so that must have been a cash payment and then bonding
Yes, ma'am.
of the
And
rest.
I think when I went back and pulled that, there was 2 components, or at least 2 components. It was the payment of true cash,
Okay.
and then the bonding of that, off the top of my head.
Okay.
Turning the slide. Comparison of the budget for the new high school. So this is just recapping what's occurred in the last few months. In June of 20, the BG1 included, was a little bit over 45 million, 45.3 specifically. And that is a typo, I apologize. The June of 20 BG1 did not include the auditorium. It should have been moved over to the right side. So in June of 20, that 45.3 did not include the auditorium. And then on the right-hand side, in October, just recently, October 21, a little bit over 57 million, did include the auditorium and the base bid. So, and it's a little bit over 2 million budgeted at that point in terms of cost. So when you take out that 2 million against the difference between 45 million and 57 million, you get to 11.6. And that's really not a true apples to apples. So you really need to take out the 2 million to be apples to apples cost. And unfortunately, like we've all seen and talked about, and we've seen recently on recent bids coming out in the local economy, those construction costs keep on going up and just unfortunate. So that is the net between those 2 BG1s. And again, did not include the auditorium and the base bid of June of 20, but it did on the right.
Mr. Martello, I don't know if you'll update that for the agenda to be posted, just to make that real correction. If you do end up updating that, would you mind including the first BG1 that was done in 2019 for the $47 million? So we'll have all 3.
Sure. Yes.
Thank you.
So the original BG1.
So you would like to have that going forward? Because I imagine he probably can't get the slide updated since he's going to do the full budget work session just for our meeting tonight, but you would like to have that provided?
Yeah, because I think when people go back and look at attachments, it's important that they just accurate, that's all. I assume that we do that whenever we have.
The only thing is, with that one, was it the full, I think the essence of the project was different too, and I'm happy to do that.
I think just to note any changes that
Gotcha.
were made.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, moving on.
You know, the easiest way to do that may just be to physically attach the
Sure.
BG1 document.
Sure.
And then that way it'll spell out how the cash allocation, how the fund allocation, how everything was
Absolutely.
funded.
Okay, so. This is just a real quick estimate in terms of the percentages on what our budget comprises of in the different categories. And this is just of the general fund, the special revenue fund, the child nutrition, daycare, and community education, just those particular funds. So when you pull those up, you know, it's a little bit over 78% on the FY21 personnel piece, and then non-personnel is 28.2. And this is so hard because we've had this influx of federal funds that have kind of skewed some of the numbers and percentages. So you really have to go back to FY19 for the last true year without COVID, the COVID influx of funding and just different variables of kids not being in school and those things that have played a part on both sides in terms of those categories. But roughly our budget was 76.21% and 23.9 in terms of those different categories, when you include those 5 different fund areas. Go ahead and turn the page. Or the slide.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you feel like the, overall, I'm assuming the overall dollars for those non-personnel costs have actually gone down over the course of those years, just because schools have been closed, we haven't had all the normal operations that you would have when you're open every day?
Absolutely. It's a give and take, fuel,
Yeah.
obviously, and fuel in terms of the non-personnel piece, but then, I'm drawing a blank, cleaning supplies, utilities, since the non-piece have declined, just those different components, as well as in the personnel piece. We didn't have a cost on sub. But yet we've had to hire some additional staff in different areas. So that's the tough part. I mean, you'll see in this, you've seen it this year already in FY '22. We do a budget, but sometimes we can only estimate on certain things, since this is now only we've had 3 years of a non-consistent school year.
Right.
So we do our best.
Yeah, it's tough to normalize that, I think, over the course of the year, so.
And with respect to those declining numbers, the income and the expenditures were actually growing in those periods with tax increases and revenue increases. And then, on the personnel increase, we did the 2% raise. So it's 28% or 21% of a different number than it was in FY '19.
Yes, ma'am. And that's why, yes, and that's a great point. And that's why that FY '21 spike, part of that percentage increase is because of the incentive that occurred in May and June. So that was a pretty decent percentage increase. So it's not really fair to assess our budget, as long as the pandemic is going on with the situation, in my opinion.
And I do think that'll be an important thing as we get through this process, is identifying those sort of extraordinary expenses that are not repeating, that we would need to make sure to consider.
Yes, ma'am.
So the bonuses, the one-time bonuses are included in the 78.1.
Yes, ma'am, in that FY '21 year. Okay, moving on to the next slide. And this is not all, these are just some of the highlights that I'm proud of, not only the business office, but the schools and the different departments, whether it's daycare and technology, the Safe Schools with Mr. Wells and Mr. Sutton, and some of the different groups that have done the legwork. A number of these grants are by the initiative of our people, to obtain these grants, and as well as get the expenditure spent in the proper manner and bring back value to our staff and buildings and programs and instruction. So all these different groups have gone above and beyond in terms of making sure that we take advantage of some of these opportunities. And I've touched on most of these throughout the last year to 14 months. So I'm not going to go real in depth, but I'm proud of what's going on here in Woodford and some of these opportunities going above and beyond. So again, publicly, thank you for all the groups that had a big part in this. Let's go ahead and turn the page or the slide. And I'm going to go real quick over this one. I just thought it was interesting in terms of different areas. This is really isn't my specific area in terms of population assessment, but I did want to point out that we do have poverty in our school district, like we all know, and those kids a lot of times need that love and support more than a good percentage of students in our district. So just the economically disadvantaged count, and I sorted it by the poverty percentage in the state, or the districts in the state. And you can see some of the but you can see some of the other districts and where we fall within those poverty percentages, which absolutely have an effect, a domino effect in terms of our budget, on providing all the great resources and support that we do to our kids and our staff. But to know that we're a great outlet for the kids as a line of the first line of defense. Okay, turn the slide, please. Food service balance. This goes back to Ms. Bradley's request in recent months, or last month, I should say. FY17, and these are the AFR fund balances, 288. And again, Ms. Squire's done a great job being efficient and responsible with her program. FY18 grew to 353,000, FY19 384,000, and FY20 535,000. And I do not have 21 again. I stated earlier, just for the final offering. So go ahead and turn the slide. I did provide the cash balance by fund report for Ms. Bradley's request last month, and you can just see a 12-month assessment. And I caution, this is the cash balance by fund, not the AFR balance. There's some other components that go into AFR ending balance, but you can see the cash balance. You're going to have some spikes. We had maybe an additional day in a month, or we've actually, or the spike in terms of participation for a particular month, as well as decline. I want to say in July, probably that'll be the ending balance. So long story short, let me just say that you'll see some fluctuation based on the number of school days and those particular months, but that's just 12-month summary representation.
Okay, so I have a few questions on that. Obviously, part of the growth in that account is because of the federal
Yes, ma'am.
free
All
lunch
participation.
program. But with it getting as high as it is, are we reinvesting in things that the schools need? Are they aware that if
That's a
there
great-
are needs, that there is a fund available to replace an oven or?
That's a great question, Ms. Bradley. That opportunity has been presented on more than one occasion to Ms. Squire, so she definitely knows that balance. To know of that opportunity, to have those capital outlay, but to have those fixed asset purchases of an oven or a stove and those types of things, or, where she can put the money, absolutely put it back in her program.
Sure, I just
So-
want to make sure that
Absolutely.
nobody's limping along
Absolutely,
when we have funds available to make things better if they're needed.
Well,
absolutely.
there will actually come a time with these funds that KU will reach out and say, hey, you're carrying too much money, we need to spend some money.
So what's the restrictions on that? If we were to say, look at this fund in particular, it has grown pretty significantly over the last couple of years. And we have a need for something that maybe is nutrition-based or something in our culinary programs or something else. Is there a way to redirect those funds into non-child nutrition, or does it have to be reinvested in?
Sure, that's a great question. Since they're federal dollars, there are rules and regs, obviously, on how you particularly earmark an expenditure. But like we've done this fiscal year and taken advantage of that indirect cost transfer, when you transfer those funds, it becomes more open in terms of the different types of expenditures that you can do it. Make the expense on. So whether it be an instruction, whether it be culinary, or whether it be whatever type of program that you want to do, when you do an indirect cost transfer, it opens it up for the identity of those dollars.
And that could be anything?
It could be anything in the general fund.
Okay.
Yes,
Okay.
it adds to
So
the general fund.
to be clear, I think what Ms. McHale is asking is if we were to look at using some of these child nutrition dollars to purchase vent hoods for the culinary classroom, that's something that could be accomplished.
General fund dollars could be used to purchase a vent hood. I can't tell you right tonight that could you buy a vent hood with the child nutrition fund specifically, where it's not a part of the revenue in and out within the selling and providing meals to kids. But what it could be is used at a general fund expenditure could be used to purchase a vent hood.
Okay.
Yeah, because of the indirect cost, free up that money. Hey, you can do that. Those types of things. Anything that we would normally pay for our general fund, because that money just goes in the general fund.
And
It
so
really frees the money up for it.
how much are we doing for indirect costs? Is that the $170,000 number or is that?
Up my head. And
I thought it was. I'm not sure.
Okay, well, that's something I guess you can look at. So that's the indirect money that you, took from the child nutrition program, you freed up and moved to general fund, so it can be used for other things. But the actual child nutrition program right now is doing really, really well, obviously. But right now, kids are not bringing in $2 for lunch or $1 for breakfast. It's all being subsidized by the federal government. So I think we probably need to make sure to kind of look at that when we're having a normal year, when we're actually having participation based on kids paying or being able to pay and based on our reimbursement rates for the free and reduced lunches. So it's a little bit, it's really kind of a skewed year to look at it. But I do think that to Ms. Bradley's point, it would make sense to have Ms. Blyer and the food service folks at each school be able to look and see if there is a need for a new oven or something within that program that these funds could actually be used on. So,
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. We know that this fund is growing at a disproportionate rate because of those federal dollars. But looking back at 18 is probably a more accurate capture of where this fund usually lives in balances. Because I don't think we saw anything this high in, the 10 years prior to that.
we've actually had to raise the
Right.
lunch prices because the fund has to sustain itself. And
Yeah.
so, and that's been fairly recently that's happened. So I think it's important to just note that this is money that's coming in that is not going to be, we're not going to have everybody on, with this paid for by the federal government. It's a COVID relief measure. And so I think it's important to kind of separate those out and plan
Right.
accordingly.
It may or may not be extended.
absolutely, the fund should be self-sufficient.
Just one question, Mr. Markeller, at least there.
I'm sorry. I'm wondering if it's like, I know our SRC spent a lot of money on feeding families and feeding, like, supporting programs. And these funds, either, like, could they use the funds to, like, provide food for programs that are going on in the schools instead of using FRC funds that are specifically, for our impoverished kids? Instead of for feeding.
Let me answer.
Had more freedom during COVID to do that kind of thing. We did a lot of that prior. I'm not exactly sure what the cutoff is on that, and Ms. Squire would know that better than I. But yeah, there are some opportunities for that as well.
I'll make a note
That's a great
on
idea.
our list of follow-ups
Yeah.
to check on that. That is a great idea. Thank you.
Go ahead and turn the slide, Ronnie, please. Mr. Asher. Transportation fleet schedule. So I know we've done a great job in terms of acquiring a set number of buses, 2 to 3 each year in the last decade or so. Just as a representation, those model year numbers in terms of the life expectancy or the life of the buses that we have remaining, roughly 57 that stand as of a couple weeks ago. And you can just see the breakout where those buses were purchased in terms of over the years, in terms of maintaining that fleet. And I bring that up because that is a dollar component of the budget every year. So
How many routes do we have right now?
it's either 20, I want to say 26, 28-ish, or 26, I would say off the top of my head.
It becomes condensed.
Sure. So having 57 buses for 26 routes, I mean, ideally, I think you'd probably like to be closer to 30.
Correct.
The
Well,
question- the question that stands out is, do we need to continue to buy at 3 buses a year?
And that's a great question. I know we definitely have to have spares, in terms of speaking for Ms. Penn. Now, whether or not it needs to be 57, I don't want to, I don't want to speak out of turn without her being here to speak to that. I know if we had an influx of drivers in the next 3 months, that would provide more opportunity for a number of buses to be on the ground. So I'll have to follow up with you. You know, if we continue to maintain 26 or 27, 28 routes, what is that ideal number? I know she's not gonna, she wants to make her things, make sure buses don't break down. We just sold at the auction on Saturday, I think 10 or 11. And so, a number of them were pretty centrally old. So I can follow up with you on the answer on that.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing to consider too, is the maintenance of keeping an older fleet versus purchasing some new ones whenever we're making those decisions.
Yeah.
Well, and the depreciation,
Yeah,
when
the
they pull the
depreciation, I
depreciation.
think I think it's after 14 years,
Yeah.
we don't get any more reimbursement.
Uh-huh.
So we do it, so what you want to do is buy enough buses and every 14 years you
Mhm.
completely turn your fleet on.
Yeah.
Now, bear in mind that the number that Mr. Martello gave you are the number of buses that have been purchased over the last 20 years. Some of those buses may be totaled out in accidents, they may be already taken off the road.
Oh, so that's not the number of buses that we currently have in the fleet.
I have that.
This is just what was purchased, am I correct?
29.
This is the current makeup of the fleet today. As
Okay,
it
so that's
stands.
the fleet
No,
number.
okay,
Yes,
I thought
but-
you
but-
told me today it was purchased.
But I'm sure a lot of those, I know we had that initiative in the last decade or so. We could probably make a fair assumption that at least in the last 10 years, those reflect the purchases in those years. So when we get beyond, I would say a decade, that's something we'd have to assess. Okay, going on to the next slide. Capacity count, you can just see our current makeup on the number of the different types of buses. Let's go ahead and skip. I know we need to get moving on to some other topics. International, so this is real quick. A majority of our buses are international. I make a good product. I don't think we would bought otherwise. I know Bluebird is the Cadillac of the bus making industry. And so let's go ahead and move to the next slide. That should just be the references for some of the material tonight. So let's close out the slide for presentation. And if Mr. Asher would pull up the PDF with the color codes. And before we go there, I'm going to very quickly just go over these individual handouts. And there's so much material here. I don't know if we're going to go into each one, but this is what was uploaded a couple weeks ago per the request of the board. And any members can look at these following, and I'm more than happy to answer questions. The ESSER 2 expenses project to date. It's 2 pages. That's just a breakout of everything that's been expensed. Project to date, or as of a couple weeks ago, for the ESSER 2 expenses. The CARES 1 expenses project to date. Those are all the CARES expenses at first round.
So on ESER's 2, the lion's share of that expenditures is cleaning services, which
A good portion is, and it's all those different areas on other certified and the fringe benefit piece. Those are just different brackets of instruction or administration. A good portion, off the top of my head, of about a third, a little bit or more than a third, was the incentive that occurred last May and June. A decent piece was the cleaning services, yes. We had some vehicles coded, as well as some purchase service, and those are the highlights.
so I do not see, because the bonuses were about 700,000.
They're throughout the
Split out,
documents,
okay.
put out, yes.
All right.
So the ESER 2 expenditures request is the original budget, or
Now,
What's the difference between?
okay,
these
so
two
the
estimates?
expenses project to date were just a breakout of the actual expenditures that have hit to date, and then the ESER two expenses were those that specifically hit in FY '21 that were coded appropriately in July. Or coded in July. There was a request by Ms. Springate to ask for the classification of those,
Okay,
and those were the ones, that was a breakdown of those.
so when I look at any of the cleaning services, just for example, the very first one at $192,000, is any portion of that in the 170?
Yes. Because if there's not another 100 in cleaning services, that comprises at least those two line items on the coding.
Okay, so and expenditures to date means since the beginning of ESER, not,
Projects today, yes, since the
not
inception of
necessarily
ESER,
this. school
across
year,
fiscal years.
Across fiscal years. And this one is specific to last school year
Yes,
as of July 1st.
that was coded, yes.
Okay, gotcha.
Do you know the total amount that we spent on
On
cleaning
cleaning,
service?
that's a great question. Off the top of my head, Mr. Atkins. Well, I know when we did the analysis, it was $500,000 that was in, at least $500,000 that would have cost, was it this fiscal year? I can get that number. It was pretty significant
It was
that we spent. And I know, yes, at that point, we were trying to ensure kids and staff and operations were occurring safely. But yes. And by the way, the in-house is going great on that piece, and they're doing their rotation every night in terms of cleaning the different locations.
I do have a couple questions on the SR2 document. The first one is, do we have any personnel for fiscal year '22 that are being paid from SR2?
Off the top of my head,
You said,
I know the cleaning expenditures, the payment of the individuals cleaning the buildings are coming out at 2 or 3. In terms of 2, I can't recall off the top of my head.
Okay, is that something you could kind of just get back with me?
the personnel being paid by ESER two funds for,
Fiscal year '22? And if so, I would just like a detail, like you could say, high school maintenance, this much, middle school, cafeteria, this much, that kind of thing.
I'll do the best I
Okay, and the next thing is, it just looks like there are a number of items in the expense report that were not included in our approved ESER2 spending plan. Some examples are like security, diesel fuel, buses, liability insurance. This concerns me because board policy 04.31 states expenditures from any district funds shall be made in accordance with the budget approved by the board. Those expenditures are not even closely related to items that we approved on the ESER2 spending plan. Furthermore, items that we did approve, like the learning recovery plan, were shifted to ESER3. The shifting of funds created an approximate $600,000 surplus in last year's general fund. The board has never talked about the surplus. I'm wondering if our schools could use some extra assistance. I know our kids are struggling. I see it in my job every day. I also see it in our results of our testing. And it really horrifies me to think of what we could be using those funds for in the classroom with the teachers in their hands. The next thing is that the total for the expenditures request is $844,420.34. But the total on the colored detailed budget sheet for fiscal year '22 is only $310,612. And then the total on the ESER2 plan, expenses project today is $1,996,103.08. And so it just concerns me that the reports don't align, that those numbers are not consistent. There's a lot of discrepancy there.
Is that a question or do you say?
It's really a statement, and if there was some way that you could kind of, make those numbers add so that, the expenses, are for us or two really should, the documents you gave, they shouldn't be that wildly discrepant. It's not like a rounding error of I rounded up to 100 instead of down to 90. I mean, those are huge, huge discrepancies. And so that is something that I'm interested in kind of knowing. And to be clear, I just want to understand what our general fund is doing, what our budget is doing, what our ESSER is doing. So I have just really basic questions of, if we didn't have ESSER funds that we're using right now, what would our budget look like? Would we be deficit for the fourth year in a row? Would we be healthy? Would we have a surplus?
ESSER funds, I would say are definitely helping the general fund. Being that we're 4 months into a fiscal year, only a third, I can't give you a projection at the end of a fiscal year with another 8 months to go. As we've seen, we had a $400,000 expense that we didn't know about until we got into the fiscal year for a bleacher repair. I mean, we had a $40,000 expense for a roof repair. We opted to adopt lacrosse as a sport. So to give a specific number, I can't. I can't give that to you. But what I can do is, as I've done on this report, is show you the different budgeted areas in a normal year, as well as show the different areas for ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 for expenses, and provide the monthly reports that we all get every month in terms of see how we're trending in terms of expenditures and revenue. That's what I can do.
I understand that there should be some consistency. It shouldn't vary between, 844,000 to 310,000 to 1,900,000 on three different documents. We have to have a handle on that because we have to know. And again, the overall big question is, without ESSER, is our general fund healthy? Are we deficit? Are we surplus? Are we okay? I just need to know those things to kind of plan and move forward and have a vision for our expenditures. Because if we're using ESSER to pay for our SROs and nurses, does that mean when we don't have ESSER, we won't have money to pay our SROs and nurses? Like, we just have to kind of understand how it's being used and what it's kind of, plugging in the general fund, or if it's not. Like, we just kind of have to have that overall barometer. And so that's a question. My next question is, exactly what are we spending the ESSER fund for? I appreciate the documents that you gave, but again, there's just so much discrepancy. And when you go through and look at the different documents and just kind of add things up, it's not clear. So I know I emailed you a list of questions after we got the document, and then followed up last Monday. And so I kind of do want to go over some of that stuff if we have time at the end, and if we don't, hopefully we can maybe, have another session.
We are at 5:58 now. So I think we are definitely gonna need to do another work. And that hopefully will give Mr. Martello time to prepare the specifics if you send in additional questions and get those back.
Miss Bradley,
Yes.
I've had a few people message me asking about the YouTube feeds, that they're not able to view that. Are we going to be able to get that fixed before the 6 o'clock meeting?
It does not sound like it. We are having technical issues. Mr. Gibson.
We're having technical issues with the computer that runs all this. I am recording this as we speak. We're having buffering issues trying to send it live online. So what I'm doing is recording it with the same setup, and then we'll upload it tomorrow.
Could you hear that?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
So we're at 6 o'clock, just for informational. We've got the ESSER 3 projects today, report breakout. We already talked about the CARES. We've got the year's project to date expenditures. and the ARP or the ESSER 3. So all those are there, provided both on the website and in paper form tonight. And then the breakout that was requested, as in years past, basically on a normal year, what those different categories look like in terms of estimated expenditures in the general fund area. So I know we're short on time at this point. Are there any other questions that I can ask or answer in a short amount of time?
I have written down all the questions that we had that we need to follow up on, and I think we need to go ahead and plan to schedule another work session.
Could we schedule it at the next regular meeting?
I think the next,
Could that work for everybody that everybody could be here? Like, what is it, is it the 13th, April, the next regular meeting? We were to schedule it again, 5 o'clock for the 13th. Would that work? Everybody
and
could
we
be
need
here?
your budget council, are you guys meeting?
Well, we'll meet before then, and this will be a topic for that session. Well, maybe how to prepare, what to prepare for the budget session.
The 13th, we actually have an equity meeting scheduled at 5 o'clock normally. I think it got canceled and rescheduled
I think
since
it
this
did. I
meeting
think
got
it's
moved,
right.
so.
Yeah.
It means that we can look at, do you want to look
In
at adding?
December, we're fine in
Yeah,
December.
we're on the sixth on the planning meeting.
Thank you.
That's what Ms. Strasher sent today, I think.
Yeah, we're trying to meet for that on the sixth.
Okay,
Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
all right, then if everyone's schedules allow, we'll plan for another budget work session at our regular meeting next month at 5 o'clock. And once again, thank you all for coming and for your input and for being willing to serve in this capacity. Mr. Martello, thank you for your information. I will get these questions to you so we can follow up on them. And if there is a motion to adjourn. There's a motion by Ms. McHale. Is there a second? Second by Ms. Springate. All those in favor of adjourning the work session, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion passes 5-0. Thank you. December 13th.
If you could give me about 2 minutes, I'm gonna stop this recording, we'll upload it